What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Overwatch League Report. I'm your host, Tamor, filling in for Brian this week. He is AWOL. We don't know where he went. Some suspect he ran away to Mexico, but if you see him, do let us know. And as always, I'm joined by Ben.
Yeah, I'm still here. I haven't ran away crying yet because of the prevalence of goats still in the meta.
Yep, and Boston getting some sad losses. I think that's a big reason why Brian left. But
yeah, well, I mean, one sad loss. They did win the other matches.
That's true, and we'll get into it. So it was Stage 2, Week 5, and I think we're finally getting to get to know which teams are at the top and which ones are not so much at the top. And we're finally wrapping up Stage 2. We had some really interesting matches this week. Perhaps the most surprising was Shock concluding their stage with perfection.
I don't know if that was necessarily the most surprising thing of the week, but it was definitely the most awe-inspiring thing of the week that we've seen our first lossless stage where a team wins every single map from start to finish. Not even just they didn't draw any maps either. It was 28 wins out of 28 maps played.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so dominant. And there's a lot of people talking right now that the Shock right now are potentially even a better team than Vancouver, which we'll obviously find out, or we'll hopefully find out in this Stage 2 playoffs, which we'll obviously touch upon probably towards the end of this a little bit more. But yeah, it's very impressive, and I'm very happy to see a team that's it's as dominant as the Titans are also.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it would be, slightly boring if no other team was as good as Titans, but this feels like, there is hope, or at least get some entertainment out of it rather than just watching one team dominate everyone else.
Yeah.
And speaking of domination, I mean, Shock utterly dominated Philly, and oh my God, it was painful to watch at moments. For example, in Junkertown, they just spawn camped, and it's like we're watching, Philadelphia Fusion, they were in the finals last year, and just getting embarrassed. I mean, it was really sad to watch, honestly.
Yeah, I mean that's probably the highlight of the match in terms of just the Shock just embarrassing the Fusion, where they just wouldn't even let them leave spawn on Junkertown.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean the Fusion. I've said previously on the show that I think that the Fusion are being a bit overrated because their Stage 1 strength of schedule was very easy, and their Stage 2 strength of schedule was considerably harder. And we see the result of that is that they did not make this Stage 2 playoffs. But I mean, if they can't even hang with a team like the Shock to the point where, at least with the Dragons, who also lost 4-0 to the Shock this week, the Dragons match looked competitive. And we'll see a rematch of the Dragons versus the Shock in the first round of playoffs here.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a dominating match by the Shock, but the Dragons didn't look just defeated and embarrassed and dead the way the Fusion did. And so I think that kind of shows a lot of where the Fusion are as a team right now. I think they've definitely dropped out of the conversation for being a higher tier team, and they're going to be kind of in that middling zone that the Dragons and the Uprising and the Hunters and maybe even a team like the Valiant are now.
Yeah, and this is, it's an interesting turnaround, really, especially, compared to last year, even Stage 1, where LA was totally at the bottom. But, let's talk about, last year, where Philly, as I mentioned, were in the finals, and now they're not even, going to be in the standings for Stage 2, and this is kind of crazy. As you mentioned before we started rolling, only 3 of the teams in the Stage 2 playoffs were in the Stage 1 playoffs. So, we're seeing all these new teams, and it's where you really never know what to expect.
Yeah, I think part of that is to do with a number of things. Probably mostly to do with the meta being in a situation where you have these matches that can kind of go either way on any given day, because the like primarily we are still seeing goats, and goats is kind of a very like even match where you have teams that even if there's one that are generally better than the other marginally, they can still lose these matchups just because of the way that certain things play out and because of these like little marginal decisions that happen. On top of that, we see because of the way the stage is set up, where each team has a different schedule every stage. There might be playing easier teams, might be playing harder teams. That does give the opportunity for some of these lower tier teams to sneak into the playoffs because they have easier schedules, as we might talk about with Shanghai, for instance. The third thing is because a lot of these teams are kind of in this like 4 through 12 zone. Like all of those teams are incredibly close together in terms of like their skill level, and we see teams that people are putting in the top, like people were putting the Seoul Dynasty near the top of a lot of rankings a week or two ago. People were putting the Gladiators as generally considered the fourth or fifth slot in their rankings. These teams are dropping to worse teams like the Spark and the Uprising. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to see some new blood going forward. And I mean, now that we're like halfway through the season, like it's very exciting, and especially because of the way that the season playoffs are going to play out, where the top 12 teams are going to be in, where you have the top 6 in for real, and the 7 through 12 seeds in this like playoff bracket play-in thing. We do have the potential to see a lot of these kind of mid-tier teams really step it up.
Yeah, exactly. One mid-tier team I do want to talk about specifically is Boston Uprising, who were in the playoffs in stage 1. Now not looking as good, but they had an interesting week where they beat the Gladiators, looked really triumphant and strong, and then and then just like I mean they did okay against Washington Justice, but that was I think a match most people had them keyed in for and were not expecting them to get like 3 losses in a row.
Yeah, no, I mean, even after the first half of that match was extremely dominant on the side of Boston, where the Uprising were doing like a lot of really weird things, playing these strange compositions, and kind of doing some things you might consider like disrespectful in terms of just like messing around on different maps in maps 1 and 2, and they still won those maps.
Mm-hmm.
So like it looked like at halftime, like this was just going to be an easy 4-0, and then when we came back from the half, Washington had a much more decisive play style. They were more aggressive, which is something that a lot of people have said consistently has been their problem, is that they just lack the confidence and aggression needed to succeed in this meta. And they came in with a plan, like a game plan, to just target down Fusions, who is known to push forward, become over aggressive, put himself out of position, and then rely on the supports to keep him alive when he drops down to like 30, 40 health. So I mean, they came in, they found the weakness in Boston, which is that there are situations where Fusion overplays positions, and a lot of those times, especially against teams that are weaker, it usually pays off. But when you come in with the game plan of really abusing that play style, we've seen that it now can work in the favor of these weaker teams. So I think that this match not only showed that Washington is capable of winning against what I would consider a mid-tier team, but they are capable of playing this aggressive style, coming in with a game plan, executing it, and really just like working around each other a lot better. Obviously, they brought in these new players, Ark and Sleepy, who have really stepped up the support line. I think Sansam was way better in this match, especially obviously in the second half, than he's been pretty much for all season. I think this was hands down Sansam's best match. So I mean, it's definitely a bright spot in an otherwise not bright stage for the Justice.
Yeah, and just to add to your point, I do think it comes down to when you get rid of fusions, you really you've won that match because, or at least that fight, because he's such a strong leader, and when you take him off the board, they don't have anyone to keep them all together, and you can hear him whenever they show they show clips of him talking to his team. He's really the key component, the glue that's holding them all together. Meanwhile, on the other hand, I guess Washington, now we know when you offer them ice cream, they will they'll fight for their fucking ice cream.
Yeah, the ultimate motivator.
That's all it took this whole time. Another upset that was really interesting was NYXL losing to Atlanta for a second time. I mean, NYXL, many people consider one of the top teams. I mean, they were certainly the top team, or considered the top team last year. And what's going on? I mean, they don't even have DeFran anymore. How is this possible?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that Baby Bay has really stepped up. He's kind of found himself performing much better in that Zarya role than he has before. I think that it's very strange with the XL. They just they seem like I feel like they're coming into these two matches and they're just not performing to the level that they've shown that they're capable of performing at. In a lot of cases, it just kind of feels like they're beating themselves. And so it's really interesting, and we're going to kind of see whether that continues coming into the playoffs here in the first round. I believe they're playing the Gladiators, who are also kind of coming off a really unexpected loss. But yeah, I mean, the Excelsior are an extremely dominant team. These are the only two losses they've had all season, are these back-to-back losses against the Reign. They've made 6 out of 6 stage playoffs. I mean, there's no doubt that the Excel are a dominant team, so it's just kind of a matter of whether the struggles that they've shown these two matches have been Atlanta playing up to them, which I think they have played a lot better in these two matches, and they've improved pretty much incrementally since the start of the stage when they built this new roster around Baby Bay. Or not new roster, but they've integrated Baby Bay, and they've brought Fried in as kind of a potential substitute off tank. But now they've integrated Daco back in. They're only playing Fried on occasional maps, usually on assault maps. They're bringing him in. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether the Excel can pick it back up and play a good match against the Gladiators, or if they've kind of fallen apart and they're notorious playoff choking selves are leaking into the regular season.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because even we have a fantasy league going on, and I have Jonak on my team, and he still was the top scoring player on my team with he had 207 points, which if you're familiar with the league, getting over 200 points is pretty rare each week. So it's they're still, I don't know. It's really confusing, but hopefully they can sort of reconvene and talk to the coaches and realize, or figure out what's going wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, well, they did go 5 maps, so that helps with fantasy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a lot of the issue right now is it's a tank line for the most part. I think that Mono is kind of fallen into this trap of playing outside of the style of the team, where classically New York has been known for being a very passive team, and because they have such a high because each individual player is such a high talent level, and because they build their team so heavily around Jonak as a damage dealer,
Mm.
They can usually get away with that style.
Yeah.
But it seems like in the past two matches tried to push away from that a little bit, and it seems like Mono especially has pushed away from that and played much more aggressively than he classically has. And it doesn't seem like that style is super paying off. I think that it can if they play it right. I just don't think that they're used to playing in that way. And I also think that Nene has been incredibly inconsistent this stage when he was kind of one of these standout Zarya players in stage one.
Right.
So I think it just has to clean up some of that play and play more consistently.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I really can't wait to see them play Vancouver Titans because their play styles are just so different, but they're also like the best at their play styles. So let's move on to another point, which we were actually talking about before the show, and you were mentioning how Hangzhou and Shanghai were actually the first two Chinese teams to make it to the stage playoffs. And this is really interesting because, I mean, of course, you think of Shanghai from last year, 0 wins, not even a possibility. And I mean, this is really different from what we're used to. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a huge turnaround for Shanghai coming into this season. I mentioned that I did think they had a bit of an easy stage. They played three of their 4 wins were against the bottom 3 teams in the league right now, which are Houston, Washington, and Florida. But, I mean, Washington did get a win off of a mid-tier team this week, and Houston and Florida. Well, Houston's been looking worse, so Florida has been looking better. Florida played decently these past few weeks at the very least. So it's not super necessarily like free wins or anything like that, but the Dragons did get helped a lot by having a relatively easy schedule at this stage. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they perform. They're going up against a rematch against a Shock.
Right.
And I think they performed pretty much as well as any other team did against a Shock this stage.
Yeah.
The closest blowout that the Shock had this stage, in my opinion, probably. So
yeah,
I mean,
I was like counting on them to at least get 1 win, and they came pretty close a few times, but Shock
yeah,
is just so unbelievably good. But yeah,
yeah. And I mean, if talking about the Shock, I think the Shock are incredibly good at doing what Vancouver is good at too, which is punishing like minor misplays.
exactly. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I don't think anyone really expects them to beat the Shock in the first round of the playoffs. But the fact that they made it there and that they've kind of pulled themselves back up into a pretty decent position in the overall standings is pretty notable. And then also the Spark, who had an upset over the Seoul Dynasty. I think most people expected the Dynasty to be slightly favored in that match.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Spark just kind of played out of their minds. Honestly, I think Gushue is obviously a huge standout, but most of that team, yeah, Bebe was really good. IDK had a lot of sick environmental kills. His positioning in a lot of those matches was like really strong. I think that Rio is also playing potentially the best he's played that I've seen. And yeah, I think that just the team as a whole is functioning a lot better. I kind of gave Godsby a lot of crap earlier on the stage for the Vancouver match where he had really questionable decision making on Sombra. But his Sombra in this match looked really, really strong.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that the Spark could be an underdog coming into these playoffs. They're kind of on a roll. They're playing against London, who have been, on and off
Mm.
these past few weeks. So, I mean, we'll see.
Right. Well, do you think the Soul versus Spark match was more of Spark uh, really coming to their own, or was it Soul really not being able to pick up the slack? I mean, we saw last week with Soul versus LA and really having a mediocre fight against a team that's pretty mediocre themselves. So, what do you think? Was it more of Soul's downfall?
Yeah, I mean, definitely going to 5 maps against Valiant is not a great look. And then coming into this week where they win 1 out of 8 maps
Hmm.
is like they definitely had the playoff opportunity in their hand and they threw it away. But I think that you can't really fault the Spark for playing for. You can't give the Dynasty the credit for losing the match. I think the Spark won the match in a lot of
Mm.
ways. I think something to point out with that match in particular is the Spark. I mean, both teams, but primarily the Spark were the ones initiating this play style. We're using ultimates in really non-traditional ways in the
Mm.
goats matchups. Generally, at this point, teams kind of have this like tango they do with their goats ultimates, where it's just like grab and then trance to respond to that, set up
Yeah.
a shatter, sound barrier, like the rally in to fight. But what Spark was doing was a lot of times Bebe was using trance to initiate fights. They were doing something a lot of teams have been doing recently, which is bombing in response to other ultimates being used to try
Mm.
and even fights out or to zone the other team off of a grab that they're trying to capitalize on. So I think
Hmm.
that a lot of what Seoul struggled with was adjusting to this kind of strange play style that the Spark were executing on goats.
Yeah.
And it's going to be tricky to see whether they can pull off that sort of play style against a team like London, who have been a lot cleaner. I know it's funny to talk about London being a really clean team on goats
Mm.
because they funnily enough were not good on that composition in the early stages of the season. They made the swap to put Prophet on Zarya. They've been considerably stronger, and I think they've played at the level you can expect the Spitfire to play coming off of last season. So it's
Yeah.
going to be a tough match, but I think the Spark are not drawing dead in that match at all.
Yeah. Exactly. So speaking of, let's talk about the stage playoffs and some of the matchups. So as we mentioned before, Shanghai playing San Francisco Shock. I feel like if I was a betting man, I would put my money on Shock. But as we mentioned earlier, looking at Shanghai's performance from this week, they're not looking too bad. Honestly, they look like they are going to put up a good fight.
But yeah, I mean, it's definitely like they definitely looked really good this week, and even in that match against the Shock where they lost 4-0, they still looked pretty strong.
Mm.
It's just that the Shock are just so insane.
Yeah.
Um, like that Paris map especially,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like Shock breaking a record, basically uh, capping 4 points on that map in 3 minutes across 2 rounds. Like it's just insane.
It is. It is.
uh, and the whole they did was Shanghai their first push, and the Shock were able to just to hold and bring back. And Super came out and had like
Yeah.
a God Shatter and hit 5 players, and it's like,
Insane, dude.
I
Yeah.
mean, like, what do you do?
Yeah, no,
How do
you
you?
can't
How do
do
you
anything.
yeah.
And it must feel so good to be super in
So,
that
I
moment.
mean, yeah, the Shocker are almost certainly going to win, but I'm excited to see this rematch. I think that the Dragons will at least put up a fight.
Yeah, and I think it also comes down to the meta. Shanghai they're in my mind the lesser goats team, but whenever they do play like Pharah and play some of these DPS heroes, they really there's more of an even battle. So and then the other match next Thursday is Hangzhou Spark versus London Spitfire, which we mentioned. Um, and then moving on to Friday, we have NYXL versus LA Gladiators. What do you think about this? Is this an even match or?
Yeah, I think this is definitely the most interesting of the four quarterfinal matches. And it makes sense that it would be because the 4 seed versus the 5 seed match. I think both of these teams are fairly evenly matched right now. They're both coming off of rough losses from this past week. They both have something to prove.
Yeah.
The Gladiators have had a pretty rough stage 1, and then they had a really strong stage 2, and then they fumbled at the end. The XL are coming off of these rough back-to-back losses, and they had a really mediocre performance in the stage 1 playoffs where they lost in the first round. So I don't think they want to be coming in and losing in the first round again. I think they want to at least try and make a deep run here and maybe upset one of these of the Titans and the Shock. So I think that it's just going to be an interesting match because both teams have so much to fight for, and I think that they are relatively evenly matched right now. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. I got to say, I'm kind of rooting for New York just because I really want to see this New York versus Vancouver match. But yeah, so then the second fight, of course, we have that day is Dallas versus Vancouver, which Dallas has been looking very strong, but we're no longer at the homestand. So if I had to make a bet, I would give it to the Titans.
Yeah, I mean, the Titans as a team haven't lost in 10 months. I mean, what do you want? Betting against the Titans right now is just kind of like foolhardy. Like at this point, the only team that has shown any kind of capability to put up any sort of semblance of a fight against them has been San Francisco. So
yeah.
I can't there's going to be some interesting matches in this playoffs, but it's going to be difficult for me to say that I'll predict anything other than a Shock Titans 2.0 finals here.
Right.
But you never know. It's Overwatch League. There have been upsets. A lot of people expected New York Excelsior to be in the Stage 1 playoff finals, and they were not. So
yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it will definitely be interesting. Is there anything else we forgot to touch on, or anything else you want to mention?
No, I'm excited. We're coming up on the halfway point of the season. After this, we're going to have our All-Star break. We're going to have our All-Star teams go at it, and a number of little fun little things we're doing. They're doing all kinds of different weird modes, and then just like a regular match. They're doing some caster showdown thing where casters are playing each other.
I really want to watch that. It's be really entertaining. Also because what's his name? I'm blanking on his name right now, but I heard that he plays on console.
Malik.
Yeah, Malik. Yeah. So that'll be interesting.
That's the meme.
I kind of sympathize with him because I play with the controller as well. So, it'll be really interesting to see him play against the others. But then we're going to Atlanta homestand, and I think it's going to be a blast. I'm
very glad that they're doing the All-Star break in the middle of the season year, because last year they did the All-Star break, All-Star weekend or whatever after the season was over, and everyone stopped caring about Overwatch League because the season was over. So this is the more classical time to do an All-Star weekend or All-Star break or whatever in terms of sports league.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And we're still at a point where, I didn't mention earlier, we're getting a sense of which teams are in the top tier and which ones are not so much. And I think we're still only at stage 2, so there's still some hope for some teams, and we're not just set on things, and we can still have some fun with it and not just all be sad that we're out of contention. But yeah, I think that pretty much wraps it up for us on the Overwatch League report. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. We read all the comments, so yeah. Make sure to follow Ben on Twitter at Ben Sharon. I don't have a Twitter, but make sure to follow Brian at FakeBMar. Yeah, how's that outro?
WickedGoodEverything at WG
Yeah.
Everything.
Oh yeah.
And at WickedGoodEverything on Instagram and twitch.tv/WickedGoodEverything. Yeah, you know, I'm sure there's probably some other random social media website that we have a thing on that I don't know. Yeah.
Yep, we have a blog. I think Maggie has a TikTok now. We're like literally everywhere. And also stay tuned to our Twitch because we're going to be doing some squad streams sometime soon. And hopefully we'll be able to find Brian in Mexico. But until then, all right, thanks for watching, guys. See ya.